Hello, my friend. How was your day today? I hope you managed to find a little peace in the middle of everything. Tonight, before we begin our quiet journey into the past, let me invite you gently. If you enjoy relaxing history that helps you drift into rest, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the little notification bell so you won't miss the next calm story we share. And since I asked about your day, I'd love to know, how has your evening been so far? Let me know in the comments, and we can turn this space into a circle of quiet reflection. Now, let us travel together to a city long forgotten by time, a city swallowed by the sea. Its name was Canopus, and tonight we will walk through its silent echoes. Imagine closing your eyes and picturing the warm coastline of northern Egypt. The Nile River, vast and timeless, opens its arms to the great Mediterranean Sea. Along this meeting point, people once built a city filled with activity. Boats arrived from distant harbors, sails filled with wind, as traders carried goods from across the known world. Streets echoed with footsteps, with the sounds of markets and greetings between neighbors. It was here that Canopus thrived, quietly and steadily, a part of the heartbeat of the ancient delta. But all of this, my friend, rests now beneath the calm waves. The city has disappeared from sight, yet the memory still lingers, waiting for us to uncover. So, let us begin to wander in imagination. Slowly, gently, step by step, as we drift through the past, let us think about what life might have been like in Canopus. People waking with the sunrise, the air filled with the sound of birds along the river, fishermen preparing their nets, merchants organizing baskets of grain, and families gathering before the day's work began. Each small action, simple and ordinary, became part of the rhythm of the city. Canopus was not only about its buildings and streets, but about the countless moments of daily life. Quiet meals, conversations, and laughter. Even now, as we picture them, it feels as though we are standing on those ancient shores, listening, breathing, remembering. It is comforting to think that while great monuments may rise and fall, the true story of a city lies in its people, their care for family, their work for sustenance, their hopes for tomorrow. In Canopus, just as in any community today, there were challenges, but also joys. Children played along the water's edge, learning the skills that their parents passed down. Neighbors helped one another in times of need. These small human details are what give history its gentle pulse. And as we explore, we remember that every civilization, no matter how distant, was made of lives not so different from ours. That thought alone can bring a calm perspective. Time moves, but humanity shares the same essence. Quiet, enduring, connected. Let us pause here for a moment. Picture the waves rolling softly above the ruins of Canopus. Imagine the silence that fills the space where voices once rose. If you listen closely, it is almost as though the sea itself holds the city in its embrace, preserving its memory. Divers who visit these waters today see fragments of walls, of pottery, of stones. They are not just broken pieces. They are clues, whispers, a soft reminder that a whole community once breathed here. And through them, Canopus still speaks, gently, across the centuries, like a lullaby of history, carried by the tides of time. Why did the city sink beneath the waters? This question brings a mix of wonder and sadness. The Almighty has his ways of reshaping the earth. The Nile shifts, the sea rises, and the land trembles with earthquakes. Slowly, quietly, over centuries, these forces claimed Canopus. Its buildings, once standing tall, now lie beneath the waves, resting as if in sleep. But perhaps there is wisdom in this. A reminder that no matter how strong our works seem, the Almighty holds the greater power. And yet, in this cycle, the memory of Canopus is not destroyed. It is preserved, patiently waiting for rediscovery. Think of the archaeologists who searched for the city. Their patience, their careful movements under the sea, brushing away sand and silt to reveal what was hidden. It is almost like waking a city from slumber without disturbing its rest. Piece by piece, fragments of Canopus returned to the light of day. Statues, coins, and simple tools, each telling part of the story. These are not treasures in the sense of wealth. They are treasures of knowledge, gifts of remembrance. Through them, we learn. Through them, we connect to people who lived long ago. Through them, history breathes again. It is fascinating, isn't it? How something once thought lost forever can return. How silence can still carry a story. In the calm of the evening, we reflect on this truth. The past never disappears entirely. It rests quietly, waiting for us to listen. And as you lay down, allowing your thoughts to drift, you are part of that listening. You are sharing in the rediscovery of Canopus. History is not just in books, it is alive in the way we remember, and in the calm it gives us tonight. Perhaps, in that calm, you find a little peace for yourself, a gentle space to rest. Let us walk again, in imagination, through the city's ancient streets. Picture the stone paths beneath your feet, the sound of distant voices carried on the wind, stalls filled with goods, fishermen mending their nets, children laughing. The warmth of the Mediterranean sun touches the stone walls. Life moves slowly, naturally. It feels familiar, even though the centuries divide us. In this quiet journey, we are not separated by time, we are joined by shared humanity. And just as Canopus once had its day, we too live our moments now, knowing that life is fragile, but also beautiful. This reflection is what gives history meaning, not only in what was lost, but in what we remember. Now, as we rest here at the beginning of our story, take a deep breath. Let your shoulders relax. Let the sounds of Canopus blend with the rhythm of your breathing. You are safe. You are calm. You are connected to a story larger than yourself. The sea may have taken the city, but it cannot take the memory. Tonight, we hold that memory gently, like a lantern in the dark. Step by step, we will continue deeper into the history of Canopus. Slowly, calmly, together, until sleep finds you and carries you into its own gentle tide. Rest is near. As we continue this journey, let us imagine walking slowly along the shoreline where Canopus once stood. The sand is warm beneath your feet, the air carrying the soft scent of salt. Ships once arrived here, bringing travelers from faraway ports. They would have seen the same horizon, felt the same breeze, and perhaps whispered a prayer of thanks for safe arrival. Life in Canopus was deeply connected to the sea, yet always dependent on the will of the Almighty. For it was He who allowed the waters to give food, and it was He who allowed people to find their way across uncertain tides. This connection reminds us that behind every achievement, there is always His guidance. Tonight, as you listen, let the image of that gentle shore settle in your thoughts, steady, calm, and filled with quiet gratitude, like a soft tide easing you toward rest. Picture now the busy markets of Canopus, traders setting out jars of oil, fishermen laying their catch of the day, women weaving baskets from reeds. The sound of bargaining, of laughter, of greetings exchanged. Markets have always been the heart of community life, places where people meet, share, and sustain one another. And yet, even in that activity, there is a sense of calm when we remember it from afar. Each jar, each coin, each simple tool discovered beneath the sea tells us of these exchanges. They are not just objects, they are evidence of connection. Connection between people, and ultimately, connection to the Almighty who made sustenance possible. These fragments whisper not only of trade, but of trust, survival, and hope. All part of the story of Canopus. Let your imagination wander deeper into the narrow streets. Stone pathways leading to small homes, walls built with care to protect families from the elements. Children's voices echoing through the alleys, laughter mingling with the calls of merchants. At dusk, families would gather, sharing food, stories, and moments of comfort after long hours of labor. The discoveries beneath the sea pottery lamps and tools are not grand, but deeply human. They tell us of meals shared, prayers whispered, and bonds that kept communities strong. As you picture these homes, think of the warmth of belonging, something every person seeks. These echoes remind us that though centuries divide us, our lives are bound by the same threads of care. And that thought alone can bring a calming reassurance tonight. A stillness in the heart. In the silence of the present sea, Canopus rests. Archaeologists describe the way they descend into the waters, light cutting through the depths, slowly uncovering what has been hidden. Each movement careful, each brush of sand deliberate, as if the city itself is gently waking, yet still preferring to dream. These divers do not disturb the city, they honor it. They understand that what they touch is not mere stone, but the memory of lives. And in that silence, there is reverence, for the Almighty is the one who allowed these remnants to remain preserved, waiting until the right time to be seen again. This rediscovery is a gift of knowledge, a reminder of how the past continues to shape us, and how patience always reveals meaning. Think for a moment about how fragile cities are. Walls may be high, streets may be strong, but they endure only as long as the Almighty wills. A single shift of the earth, a rise in the sea, a tremor in the ground, and everything changes. Canopus teaches us this lesson. Its fall was not sudden, but gradual, as waters rose and foundations weakened. Yet, instead of despair, we can see wisdom. A reminder that we should not cling too tightly to what we build, but instead remember the source of all endurance. He who gives, he who takes, and he who preserves memory for us to learn. And so, Canopus, though gone, remains in our reflection, resting quietly beneath the sea, teaching us humility. Let us walk further, imagining the temple walls and open courtyards, not in the sense of worshipping stone, for stone itself has no power. Rather, as a gathering place where people paused, reflected, and gave thanks for safety and provision. Every community needs places of rest and reflection, where hearts remember their dependence on the Almighty. In Canopus, such places must have offered comfort after difficult journeys, a reminder that human strength alone cannot carry us, but guidance and mercy do. The ruins of these structures still remain underwater, silent and unmoving, yet still telling us, people once sought meaning here, and while they have passed, the lesson remains. Reflection is timeless, and gratitude never fades. Even across the centuries, it still speaks. The coins found in Canopus carry images and marks of rulers, symbols of exchange. To the people who used them, they were tools of daily life. Today, they are silent messages. They tell us of trade networks that stretched far beyond the delta. Goods moved, people traveled, knowledge spread. But behind all of this movement was always the unseen hand of the Almighty, guiding events, setting paths, and reminding us that provision comes only from him. The coins may no longer carry value, but they carry a story of dependence, of effort, and of community. And as you rest tonight, let that story bring perspective. What endures is not wealth itself, but the lessons we carry in our hearts. Lessons that give peace. Think also of the statues raised in Canopus. Many of them now rest on the seabed, covered in sand, their features softened by time. They are not objects of worship. They are stone, nothing more. But as historical artifacts, they reveal the artistry and dedication of those who carved them. The human need to create, to leave a mark, is clear in these works. And through them, we are reminded that creativity itself is a gift from the Almighty. He gives minds the power to shape, hands the skill to build, and hearts the desire to express. The statues may lie broken, but the inspiration remains intact. We see in them the echo of effort, of beauty, and of memory, a reflection of the human story that continues in each of us. As the night deepens, let us return to the shore once more. The waves moving gently, the stars above the horizon shining steadily. Imagine sitting there, listening to the water, knowing that beneath it rests a city once alive. The silence is not heavy, it is calming. For in that silence, there is the reminder that all things return to the Almighty, and all things are preserved in His wisdom. Canopus is not forgotten. Its story endures, not because of stone, but because reflection keeps it alive. And tonight, you are part of that reflection. In this calm, in this moment, history becomes a soft lullaby, a path leading you toward sleep. So now, as we close this part of the journey, take comfort in the thought of Canopus resting under the sea. Its people gone, but not erased. Its buildings broken, but still speaking. The Almighty allowed its memory to survive, so we could learn. And in that learning, find perspective and peace. Let this story settle over you like a gentle tide. Slow your breathing, let your thoughts loosen, and allow the calm to carry you. History is not loud, tonight it is soft, patient, and soothing, just like the waves above Canopus. And with that calm, may your rest come easily. The city of Canopus rested where the Nile River reached out to meet the Mediterranean Sea. Imagine the great river flowing with calm strength, carrying silt, water, and life from deep within Africa toward the northern coast of Egypt. At this point where river and sea embraced, a city was born, a place where boats found safe harbor, where goods were exchanged, and where people paused before continuing their journeys. The Almighty allowed the Nile to be a source of sustenance for generations, and here at its edge, Canopus thrived. The rhythm of the river shaped the rhythm of the city. To live at the edge of the Nile was to live at the crossroads of water and land, of people and trade. And tonight, we will imagine the sights and sounds of that meeting place. Slowly, calmly, as if walking along its banks, step by step, thought by thought, the Nile was not only a river, but a lifeline. Its waters carried fertile soil, allowing crops to grow in abundance. Farmers near Canopus planted fields of grain, vegetables, and fruit trees, depending on the river's cycles for their harvests. With each flood season, the land renewed itself, a mercy from the Almighty. Families prepared for these cycles with patience, adapting their lives to the flow of the water. The river gave food, it gave trade, and it gave direction. Without it, Canopus could not have existed. Archaeologists today find traces of irrigation, canals, storage jars, and grinding stones that remind us of how closely tied life was to the river's gift. These discoveries whisper of people who worked with steady hands, guided by hope for provision. Their lives may be long gone, but their memory lingers in the soil. Along the banks, fishermen cast their nets at dawn, waiting quietly as the water moved. Fish of many kinds filled the delta, feeding not only Canopus, but neighboring towns. Fishing was not a grand profession, yet it sustained countless families. The Almighty allowed the sea to provide, and through their effort, families found their meals. Divers exploring the sunken city have uncovered net weights and fishing tools, simple objects that tell profound stories. Each stone, each tool, represents patience, persistence, and daily reliance on sustenance. In the calm of the evening, it is easy to picture these fishermen, steady and focused, returning home with their catch. Their steps on the shoreline, their boats rocking gently in the tide, all part of the ordinary rhythm of Canopus. A rhythm now silent, yet still echoing beneath the sea, waiting for us to remember. Trade also flourished at the edge of the Nile. Merchants guided their boats into the harbor, sails full of wind, carrying jars of oil, amphorae of wine, and baskets of grain. But these goods were not powerful in themselves. They were signs of human effort, exchange, and community. Each marketplace was alive with conversation, bargaining, and the greetings of travelers from afar. Some coins found beneath the sea still bear the marks of trade, the weight of exchange. They are not treasures of wealth today, but treasures of memory. Through them, we know that Canopus was connected to lands beyond Egypt, a hub of meeting between cultures. The Almighty allowed these paths to cross, weaving people together in ways still remembered. As you imagine this harbor, think of the soft creak of wood, the rustle of sails, and the voices of travelers. All of it now quiet, beneath the waves. The harbor itself must have been a remarkable sight. Ships, large and small, their masts reaching skyward, lining the waterside of Canopus. Workers hauling ropes, unloading goods, and repairing vessels for the next voyage. The smell of salt, the cries of seabirds, the rhythm of waves against the hulls of boats. Even in the busyness, there was a calm order, for every hand had its role. Archaeological dives reveal anchors and stone blocks once used for docking. These remains remind us of the labor of countless unnamed workers who gave strength to the city's lifeline. Their efforts may be hidden, but the Almighty preserved their traces beneath the sea. And in remembering them, we honor the quiet strength of ordinary lives, the strength that builds and sustains communities. Beyond trade, the edge of the Nile was a place of welcome. Travelers, arriving from long journeys, could finally step on land, stretch their limbs, and find refreshment. Inns, resting places, and courtyards must have dotted the harbor's edge. Though their walls are gone, archaeologists find fragments of pottery and cooking vessels that suggest meals shared, water offered, and kindness extended to strangers. Hospitality was not only a courtesy, but a necessity, for life on the road or sea was harsh. The Almighty teaches mercy through such acts, and in Canopus, mercy lived through human hands. Each visitor, welcomed or fed, became part of the city's story. And though the buildings are no longer visible, the spirit of welcome remains in the memory. As you listen now, let that image warm your thoughts, like a lantern glowing in the night. A soft, steady light of human kindness. Daily life along the Nile's edge was steady and humble. Children played near the water's banks, splashing and chasing each other while parents worked nearby. Farmers carried baskets of produce toward the markets, while women prepared meals in clay ovens. The rhythm of life was shaped by sunrise and sunset, by the call of the river and the needs of the family. Simple clay jars discovered beneath the waters once carried water or grain. They are not glamorous, yet they speak of care, responsibility, and the effort to provide. Each jar tells a story of someone lifting, pouring, sharing. The Almighty allowed such ordinary objects to last, preserved in the silt, so we could glimpse the heartbeat of Canopus. Through these objects, we are reminded that history is not only kings and battles, it is the daily lives of people like you and me. Evenings at the Nile's edge must have been a time of rest. The sun sinking beyond the horizon, painting the sky in warm colors. Families gathering to share food, voices softening after the day's labor. Fishermen returning, farmers setting aside tools, merchants closing their stalls. The air filled with the scent of cooking, the sound of quiet laughter, the comfort of community. Archaeologists have found oil lamps that once lit these evenings. Their flames were small, but they gave light to moments of peace. The lamps themselves had no power. It was the Almighty who allowed them to shine and to guide. Imagine that glow flickering against stone walls, reflecting the warmth of family gatherings. A reminder that rest has always been a blessing. The river was also a teacher. It showed the people of Canopus the importance of patience, for floods came in seasons and harvests required waiting. It taught them resilience, for waters sometimes shifted and fields had to be rebuilt. It taught them humility, for no matter how much they planned, the cycles were in the hands of the Almighty. Farmers may have sowed, fishermen may have cast their nets, merchants may have prepared their goods, but provision always came by His will. The ruins of canals, storage buildings, and boats remind us of this constant lesson. Human effort is needed, but it is never complete without His mercy. That truth gave meaning to life at the Nile's edge. And that truth remains timeless, even for us today. A soft lesson carried across centuries, a lesson that calms the heart. To stand at the edge of the Nile was to stand at a threshold. Behind you lay the lands of Egypt, with its fields, villages, and great cities. Before you stretched the open sea, mysterious and vast. Canopus lived at this threshold, bridging land and water, past and future. Its people looked inward toward the river for sustenance, and outward toward the sea for opportunity. The Almighty placed them at this meeting point, and through it, their lives became part of a larger story. A story of connection, of exchange, and of resilience. Though the waves have now covered their stones, the memory still rises like the tide, gently, steadily, reminding us of what once was, and guiding us into reflection tonight. The meeting of river and sea made Canopus a place of constant movement. Goods from inland travelled north along the Nile, while goods from across the Mediterranean arrived by ship. Imagine the colours of fabrics, the smells of spices, the sounds of languages mixing in the market square. Yet, beyond the trade and exchange, what mattered most was the human bond. Each handshake, each conversation, each shared meal was a sign of connection. The Almighty allows such encounters, weaving strangers into friends and communities into networks of trust. Archaeologists find traces of imported pottery, evidence of these far-reaching ties, not just objects, but voices across distances, reminding us that Canopus was never isolated, but always part of something larger, always touched by the current of history. At the edge of the Nile, the air itself must have carried a special calm. Early mornings wrapped in mist, evenings glowing with the reflection of sunset on the water. Fishermen setting out before dawn, travelers preparing for journeys, families watching the horizon. These rhythms are not foreign to us. They are still the rhythms of life near rivers today. The Almighty created these cycles, steady and reliable, so that people could find sustenance and peace. The ruins beneath the waves are silent now, yet they remind us of this timeless pattern. The sound of water, the glow of light, the gathering of people. Life in Canopus was ordinary, yet extraordinary in its persistence. And in remembering it, we slow our own pace. Breathing in the stillness of the story, we can also think of the role of water as protection. The Nile provided not only food and transport, but also a natural defense. To approach Canopus by land was difficult, and by sea even more so without knowledge of the delta's currents. The Almighty placed this city in a position where its people could feel secure. Yet that same water that guarded them eventually became the force that covered them. This balance of safety and risk is part of every community's story. Canopus teaches us that no human design is permanent. Security exists only as long as he allows it. What was once a shield can also be a test. A truth preserved in the silence beneath the waves. Archaeologists have found columns, broken walls, and scattered stones at the seabed where Canopus once stood tall. These are not empty ruins. They are chapters of history written in stone. Each fragment reveals how people built, how they lived, how they worked with the environment granted to them. The Almighty gave them knowledge to build and strength to endure. Though the structures fell, the lessons remain. We see in these ruins the fragility of human effort, but also its beauty. A reminder that even broken pieces can tell a whole story, and that memory itself is a gift. A gift carried across centuries for us to reflect upon. The delta itself is a remarkable landscape. Channels of water spreading like veins, carrying life into the land, birds nesting along the banks, reeds swaying in the breeze, fish darting through the shallows. The Almighty designed this richness, allowing countless creatures to thrive. People of Canopus lived within this abundance, but also with responsibility. They depended on the delta, yet they also shaped it with canals and fields. Archaeological traces of these works still lie under the sea. They tell us that human life has always been a dialogue with the environment. To live in Canopus was to live in conversation with the river, a conversation that continues even in its silence. Canopus was not a capital city, not the seat of kings, yet it held importance as a center of life at the edge of the Nile. Its role was humble but essential. It connected Egypt's heartland with the wider sea. Merchants, sailors, farmers, and families together gave it its strength. The Almighty willed this place to exist for a time, and then willed it to fade beneath the waters. What remains is not the power of rulers, but the memory of community. That in itself is profound. For history is not only about monuments. It is about ordinary people living ordinary days, and through them, extraordinary lessons are preserved. The fall of Canopus into the sea was gradual, not sudden. The river shifted, the sea rose, the earth trembled, all under the command of the Almighty. To its people, the changes must have been difficult, even painful. Yet we, centuries later, see in this fall a gentle reminder. Nothing built by human hands is everlasting, but in their passing, lessons are gifted to us. Canopus did not vanish, it transformed into memory, into reflection, into a story to soothe us tonight. In that sense, the city still breathes, softly, like the tide. Steady, calm, eternal in remembrance. At night, the edge of the Nile must have glowed with lamps and torches. The sound of water mingled with voices, the sky filled with stars. Families resting, travelers arriving, merchants storing goods for the next day. The Almighty spread the heavens above them, a canopy of calm. Those same stars still shine today, though the city lies below. Time has moved, but creation continues its steady rhythm. In thinking of Canopus, we remember that life is brief, but the signs of the Almighty endure. The stars remind us of continuity, of guidance, of stillness, just as they did for the people of Canopus, just as they do for us now. As divers move carefully through the underwater ruins, they find statues, pottery, and tools. Each discovery is not only scientific, but deeply human. These were the objects once held, once used, once valued in daily life. They carry no power of their own, but the Almighty preserved them as signs, as reminders of lives once lived. The divers' lights illuminate them for a moment before darkness returns. In that cycle, we are reminded of memory itself, bright, then fading, yet always present if we choose to reflect. Canopus may be gone, but it is not silent. It whispers through its remnants, like waves lapping gently at the shore. Quiet, persistent, soothing. So, standing with our thoughts at the edge of the Nile, we pause. We see a city that once thrived, now resting beneath the waves. We hear echoes of families, traders, and fishermen. We feel the balance of provision and fragility, the gifts and tests given by the Almighty. Canopus is not only a city, it is a lesson of dependence, humility, and connection. As you let these images settle, let them calm your mind. The story of Canopus is a lullaby of history, not loud, not forceful, but gentle, steady, and soothing, guiding you softly toward rest. The city of Canopus was more than a settlement, it was a meeting point. Here, along the water's edge, traders arrived with goods, families found sustenance, and travelers paused to regain their strength. The markets, streets, and harbors formed a rhythm that pulsed with life, not hurried, but steady, woven into the flow of the river and the calm of the sea. The Almighty provided the river, the harvest, and the hands to labor. People of Canopus worked with that provision, turning it into food, shelter, and community. In this balance, the city flourished for a time. It became a place not of power, but of connection, a place where rest was as important as trade. And tonight, we imagine its quiet heartbeat. Trade in Canopus was both local and distant. Farmers brought grain, fruit, and vegetables from nearby lands. Fishermen offered fresh catches from the delta. Merchants from abroad carried oils, ceramics, and fabrics. Each contribution filled the market with variety and color. Archaeologists have found amphora-large clay jars that once held these goods. They are heavy and simple, yet they carried the lifeblood of trade. Without them, markets could not have functioned. The Almighty gave people the knowledge to craft, the strength to carry, and the means to sustain each other. Through such ordinary tools, communities thrived. The market square must have been filled with voices. Sellers calling out their wares, buyers bargaining, children weaving through the crowd. Yet, in the memory we hold tonight, it is not noise but gentle echoes, a soft hum of human life drifting across time. The market was not only about profit, it was about survival, about making sure families had what they needed. Archaeologists' discoveries of weights, scales, and coins confirm this daily rhythm. These objects are not treasures of wealth, they are treasures of memory. Each coin and each scale tells us, here people worked with diligence and fairness. Here life moved at the pace of daily exchange, quiet, steady, human. Travelers who arrived in Canopus often sought more than trade. After weeks on the sea, they longed for rest. Inns, courtyards, and homes welcomed them with food and water. Hospitality was not simply custom, it was a necessity. The Almighty teaches compassion, and people of Canopus practiced it in their own way. To offer water to the thirsty, bread to the hungry, and a place to sleep to the weary was an act of mercy. Archaeological finds of cooking pots, wells, and resting spaces hint at these practices. Each broken shard speaks of meals once shared. Each stone well speaks of thirst once quenched. These fragments remind us that kindness is as vital as trade. Inns and resting places also carried stories. Travelers told of distant lands, of storms at sea, of bustling ports across the Mediterranean. The people of Canopus listened, learning of places they might never see. In this way, the city was a crossroads, not only of goods, but of ideas. Archaeologists find imported pottery that reflects these exchanges. Objects shaped in distant lands, carried across waters, then left behind in Canopus. They remind us that no city exists alone. The Almighty allows paths to cross, and through these crossings, knowledge flows. For Canopus, rest and trade were inseparable. Both nourished its people in different ways. Food was central to life in Canopus. Bread baked in clay ovens, fish grilled fresh from the sea, fruits gathered from fertile fields. The smell of these meals would have filled the streets, drawing neighbors together. Archaeologists have uncovered grinding stones used to make flour, ovens for cooking, and jars for storage. Each tool tells of hands that prepared meals, families that gathered, and blessings that sustained. Food is more than nourishment, it is connection. The Almighty provides it, and people share it. In Canopus, this cycle of provision and sharing gave the city its warmth. Even across centuries, we can almost taste the memory of those meals. Simple, wholesome, life-giving, even the tools of rest have been found beneath the sea. Beds, benches, and fragments of household items show us that life in Canopus included comfort. After long days of labor, people sought quiet corners to relax. Rest is a gift, and the Almighty makes it possible. It was as true for them as it is for us. Imagine families gathering at night, children falling asleep while parents talked softly, lamps flickering, shadows dancing on the walls. These small details do not make it into history books, but they are history's heart. The ruins beneath the waves hold these whispers still. They remind us that rest is as essential as work. Boats arriving at Canopus often needed repair. Carpenters and craftsmen worked near the shore, mending sails, carving wood, and sealing holes with pitch. Their work was practical, yet deeply important. Without them, trade would falter and travelers would be stranded. The Almighty gave them skill, and through that skill, the city endured. Archaeologists have found tools of woodwork and ship repair beneath the waters, silent now, but once essential to the flow of life. Each tool, each fragment, is a voice of labor, a reminder that communities are built not only by leaders, but by countless hands, hands guided by purpose. The edge of the market likely saw entertainers, storytellers, and musicians, not in the sense of grandeur, but as part of daily relaxation. Music carried on simple instruments, stories told aloud in the glow of evening lamps. These were not idols or rituals, they were human expressions of joy. The Almighty created hearts to need both work and moments of lightness. Archaeological evidence of flutes and small instruments has been found across ancient Egypt and likely touched Canopus as well. Their sound was not power, but comfort. A gentle escape from labor, a reminder of humanity's shared rhythm. Even in their play, people were part of a cycle of mercy, a cycle that calmed and united. To rest in Canopus was to feel the balance of life. Work in the day, trade in the market, stories in the evening, and quiet sleep at night. The city lived at a pace set by river and sea, by sunrise and sunset. The Almighty set these cycles, and people moved within them. Archaeologists may find only fragments, but through them we see this balance clearly. Canopus was never only about trade, was about living, resting, and enduring, and in that truth lies its beauty. Not grand, not eternal, but meaningful. A city that reminds us of life's essentials: work, rest, and gratitude. As the harbor bustled, there must have been moments when people simply paused, standing by the water's edge, watching ships arrive and depart, hearing the calls of sailors as ropes were tightened. Trade was constant, yet reflection was always possible. The Almighty allows both motion and stillness, and Canopus carried both within its rhythm. For every exchange of goods, there was also a quiet glance at the sea, a silent breath of relief after a long journey. Archaeologists describe anchors, stone blocks, and dock remains that show us how vital this harbor was. Yet those remains also remind us of the calm that settled when ships finally rested. A calm that touched both sailors and townsfolk. A calm that lingers even now beneath the waves, whispering stillness through memory. The families of Canopus lived alongside the traders and sailors. Children learned by watching, helping their parents with small tasks, carrying baskets, arranging goods, or simply observing. These children grew up surrounded by water, commerce, and resilience. The Almighty gave them strength to learn, to grow, and to continue their community. Small toys and household objects discovered underwater hint at their presence. These fragments remind us that history is not only about adults, but also about young voices that once filled the air. Their laughter is gone, but its echo survives in what was left behind. For every city is shaped not only by labor, but by hope carried in its children. Canopus was no different. Rest houses near the markets likely became places of story. Merchants from far away shared tales of storms, mountains, and foreign lands. The people of Canopus listened, their imaginations stretching across the seas. The Almighty allows hearts to seek knowledge, and through these stories, Canopus became part of a wider world. Pottery from Greece, coins from distant kingdoms, and artifacts of mixed origin have been found beneath the sea. Each object is a voice, carrying not only trade but narrative. Through them, we see how interconnected the ancient world truly was. And through them, we remember that human beings have always been seekers of knowledge, curious and thoughtful. This curiosity remains within us tonight, guiding our reflections, calming us with wonder. Meals shared in Canopus were not only physical sustenance, but also a sign of unity. Families gathered, neighbors visited, travelers were welcomed. Food was the language of connection, and the Almighty provided its source. Archaeologists' discoveries of ovens, storage jars, and tableware remind us of this constant. Even the smallest fragment of pottery tells us of a meal once prepared, once shared, once remembered. Imagine the warmth of bread, the scent of fish, the sweetness of fruit. Imagine the voices around the table, softened by gratitude. These are not grand events, but they are what made Canopus alive. Simple acts, deeply meaningful, carried across time. Acts that still soothe us when remembered. Craftsmen of Canopus gave their skills to the community. Woodworkers repairing ships, potters shaping clay, weavers creating baskets. Their hands worked daily, steady and patient. The Almighty gave them talent, and they used it for service. Tools found beneath the sea chisels, weights, fragments of kilnness, of their diligence. They remind us that every city stands not by rulers alone, but by the hands of countless workers, each one essential, each one irreplaceable. Their names are forgotten, but their effort remains, preserved in the silent testimony of tools, whispering of a life of labor and purpose. To rest in Canopus was also to find healing. Travelers, recovering from long journeys, may have sought quiet corners to regain strength. Families tended to one another, caring for the sick and the weary. The Almighty is the source of healing, and through human care, His mercy flows. Archaeologists have found vessels that may have once carried oils and herbs, used in daily remedies. These objects are reminders that compassion has always been part of life. Not medicine alone, but kindness in action. Imagine someone offering water, another offering rest, a family sharing comfort. These small acts are eternal. They endure in the story of every community. Evenings in Canopus carried their own peace. The sun setting behind the delta, lamps glowing, the market settling into silence. Traders counting their coins, families preparing for rest, children closing their eyes. The Almighty spread the sky above them, stars shining steadily as they always have. People must have looked upward, feeling both small and connected. The same stars they saw still shine today over us. In that connection, we find humility and calm. Canopus may be gone, but its people's gaze toward the heavens is something we share. A timeless gesture carried through centuries. A gesture of reflection and rest. Though much has been lost, Canopus continues to speak, through artifacts, through ruins, through memory. It teaches us that trade is not only about wealth, but about trust, that rest is not only about sleep, but about renewal. The Almighty allowed this city to exist, and allowed its traces to remain, so we could learn. The story is not loud, not forceful, it is gentle. Like the waves above it, it moves slowly, steadily. Tonight, as you listen, let its lesson settle in your thoughts. Life is fragile, yet meaningful, and in remembering, we find peace. So we close this segment at the marketplace of Canopus, a place of trade, of rest, of community. Ships may be gone, voices silenced, but the rhythm continues in memory. The Almighty preserved fragments for us, guiding us to reflect. In these reflections, we find calm. In calm, we find rest. The city once thrived at the edge of the Nile, and now it thrives in our thoughts, as a story to soothe, a history to comfort, a memory to guide. Let this remembrance ease your heart tonight, soft, steady, like a tide bringing you to shore. Homes in Canopus were built with care, shaped by the needs of families and the rhythm of the delta. Walls of stone and mud brick, roofs supported by wooden beams, small courtyards open to the sky. These were not palaces, but places of belonging. Each home reflected the effort of its builders and the mercy of the Almighty who allowed them to create shelter. Archaeologists have uncovered foundations and fragments of household pottery, silent reminders of family life. They tell us of meals cooked, stories told, and rest found after long days. Homes were the heart of Canopus, not grand, not eternal, but deeply human. To imagine them is to imagine warmth, a warmth that still lingers in memory. Inside these homes, daily routines unfolded. Women prepared food with grinding stones and clay ovens. Children played with small toys, some carved from wood or shaped from clay. Men worked in the fields or along the harbor, returning home with tired steps. These details, simple yet vivid, remind us that history is not only about rulers, it is about families. The Almighty provided food, work, and companionship, and families built their lives upon those blessings. Broken jars and lamps discovered underwater carry the traces of this routine. They are fragments of ordinary life, but ordinary is what makes history real, and what makes it calming to remember. Courtyards were places of gathering. Families shared meals, neighbors visited, and travelers found rest. The air filled with the scent of bread, the sound of quiet conversation, the laughter of children. The Almighty teaches mercy, and in these small spaces, mercy was practiced daily. A jug of water offered, a seat given, a story told. These are acts that endure across time. Archaeological remains of wells and cooking vessels remind us of these moments. Each piece whispers, people lived here, they cared, they shared. These truths cannot be erased by water or time. They survive because they are part of what makes us human. They survive because remembrance is mercy. Even the layout of homes reflected purpose. Rooms arranged for sleeping, storage, and work. Roofs flat enough to sit upon in the evening, watching the sky above the delta. Archaeologists have traced outlines of such spaces beneath the sea. Their walls are broken, but their shape still speaks. The Almighty gave people the sense to design, to arrange, to build according to need. These homes remind us of simplicity. No luxury, but enough. Enough to live, enough to rest, enough to be grateful. That is the true richness of a home. Objects found in Canopus homes are small, but meaningful. Pots for storing grain, lamps for lighting evenings, tools for cooking and weaving, each one a silent witness to daily labor. They carry no power of their own, but the Almighty allowed them to endure so that we could learn. Archaeologists brush away sand and mud to reveal them, lifting fragments into the light. And with each discovery, we see ordinary lives emerge, not in grandeur, but in dignity. The dignity of work, of care, of perseverance. This is what homes were built upon, and this is what remains in their memory. The walls of Canopus homes must have echoed with voices. Parents guiding their children, siblings sharing stories, neighbors calling from one house to another. These voices are gone, but the echoes remain in imagination. The Almighty gave speech as a gift, allowing people to share, teach, and connect. To think of these voices now is to feel their presence. Not in a mystical way, but as a remembrance of humanity's continuity. Each home carried generations of sound, of memory, of care. The ruins beneath the sea are silent, but when we reflect, they come alive again. Alive in thought, alive in memory, alive in reflection. And that reflection brings peace. Evenings in the homes of Canopus were likely simple and calm. Oil lamps flickered, casting soft light upon walls. Families gathered after labor, sharing meals and quiet conversation. Children drifting into sleep while parents planned for tomorrow. The Almighty created night for rest, and in these homes, that rest was embraced. Archaeologists have uncovered lamps and small tables that tell of this rhythm. The glow of a lamp, the warmth of a meal, the safety of Walsall gifts remembered across centuries. To imagine these scenes is to slow the mind, to breathe more deeply. For history is not only events, it is also the memory of peace. Peace that soothes us still. Life within the homes was not without struggle. Illness, scarcity, and hardship were part of existence. But even in hardship, families found strength. The Almighty tests, but also provides, and through patience, people endured. Archaeologists sometimes find remains of medical tools, jars that once carried herbs or oils. They remind us that people cared for one another, seeking remedies and relief. A child cared for, a parent tended to, a neighbor assisted. These were acts of compassion, acts that gave homes not only walls, but hearts. And those hearts continue to inspire when remembered. Compassion is timeless. The roofs of Canopus homes may have been places of reflection. At dusk, families might have sat together, watching the sun sink behind the delta, the sky changing colors, stars appearing one by one. In that moment, the world must have felt vast and close at once. The Almighty spread the heavens above them, a canopy for all people. To look upward was to feel humility and connection. That same sky still stretches over us now. The memory of their gaze joins ours in this moment of reflection. Through the ruins of their homes, we see continuity, a reminder that creation endures, even when cities fall. The rhythm of homes gave Canopus its life. Work in the day, meals at dusk, rest at night. Families rose with the sun, slept with the stars, and moved in harmony with river and sea. The Almighty set these cycles, and people lived within them. Archaeological traces show us not only how they lived, but how similar they were to us. They cared for their children, they prepared their meals, they rested after labor. These are constants of humanity, carried across centuries. The homes of Canopus, though lost, still remind us of this truth, that life is built not on monuments, but on family, and that family is the true heart of history. The streets between homes were narrow and winding. Children must have run through them, chasing each other in play. Neighbors met in these pathways, exchanging greetings, offering help, or sharing food. The Almighty allows this community to exist, and these small interactions are the threads that wove Canopus together. Archaeologists uncover doorways, thresholds, and fragments of paving stones that once carried countless footsteps. They are silent now, but when we imagine, we hear the footsteps again. Each step a reminder that life is lived one moment at a time. Each step a reminder that community is built from ordinary connections. This is what gave strength to the homes of Canopus, strength that still whispers from beneath the waves. In times of celebration, homes likely filled with visitors. Families shared their joy through meals, gifts, and words of blessing. These were not events of grandeur, but moments of gratitude. The Almighty allows happiness to be shared, multiplying it through kindness. Archaeologists sometimes find decorative pottery or jewelry that suggests such gatherings. These items are not wealth, they are memory. Memory of laughter, of voices raised in thankfulness, of families united. The ruins beneath the sea cannot erase these moments. They remain not in stone, but in reflection, reflection that brings us peace even now. Hardship, too, was part of daily life. When the river flooded too high, when storms delayed trade, when illness struck, families had to endure. The Almighty tests with difficulty, but also grants patience. In Canopus, neighbors supported one another during such times. Archaeologists have found storage areas that likely held reserves for times of need. These are signs of foresight, of planning, of community resilience. Each jar and each granary is a reminder that survival was shared. No family stood alone, they leaned on one another. And that unity was a gift that allowed them to endure together. The tools of daily labor also speak of life in these homes. Looms for weaving, grindstones for flour, small knives for food preparation. These objects do not seem extraordinary, but they are the backbone of survival. The Almighty gave skill to human hands, and those hands shaped the rhythm of Canopus. Archaeologists, lifting these tools from the seabed, see not just objects, but stories. Stories of women weaving cloth for their families, of men mending fishing nets, of children learning by watching. Each tool is a lesson in diligence, patience, and gratitude, a lesson that still speaks across centuries, a lesson we can hear tonight, softly and calmly. Water was essential for every home. Wells and jars provided what was needed for cooking, washing, and drinking. The Nile gave, by the will of the Almighty, the water that sustained life. Archaeologists have found remains of water jars and channels that carried this blessing into the city. Without water, Canopus could not have survived. Each drop was precious, each vessel important. To imagine these jars is to imagine hands carrying them, pouring them, sharing them. The act of giving water is timeless. It is mercy, and it endures. Mercy that fills both body and heart. The silence of the ruins does not erase the sound of prayer. Families in Canopus, like families everywhere, must have lifted their hearts in gratitude and hope. The Almighty is the true provider, and it was to Him that people turned for strength. Archaeologists cannot uncover these prayers in stone or clay, but we can reflect on them in thought. Gratitude spoken at meals, hope whispered at night, requests made in hardships, these are invisible traces of life. They remain even when walls fall. They are the essence of daily existence. In remembering Canopus, we also remember this truth, that life is sustained not by hands alone, but by faith, and faith endures beyond ruins. The fall of Canopus turned homes into ruins, yet their story was not destroyed. The Almighty allowed fragments to remain, preserved beneath the waters. Divers today uncover pots, lamps, and walls that speak of those homes. Each find is not just evidence, but a bridge between their lives and ours. As we imagine their homes, we reflect on our own, on the value of shelter, family, and rest. These are blessings too often overlooked, but remembered clearly when seen through history. The homes of Canopus remind us to be grateful for what we are given each day. Night in Canopus homes must have been a time of quiet reflection. Lamps dimmed, voices hushed, the world settling into silence. Families closed their doors against the night air, finding comfort in the walls they had built. The Almighty created night as a time of rest, and in these homes, that gift was embraced. Archaeologists have uncovered small sleeping areas, platforms, and household furniture, simple but sufficient. These remnants show us that comfort was sought in modesty, not in excess. To picture these nights is to feel calm ourselves, a calm that stretches across time, a calm that invites us to rest. Even now, as Canopus lies beneath the sea, the story of its homes continues. They are no longer filled with voices, but their memory fills our thoughts. They remind us that history is built not only on monuments, but on ordinary lives. The Almighty allows these traces to remain so that we may learn gratitude, patience, and humility. Each broken wall, each fragment of pottery is a teacher. And tonight, as we listen, we are its students, quietly, calmly, we take in its lesson, that life is fragile but meaningful, that homes are more than buildings, they are the heart of humanity. So we close this reflection on the homes of Canopus. They stood for centuries, then fell into the sea, yet their story is not lost. It continues in fragments, in discoveries, and in remembrance. The Almighty preserved them so that we could reflect tonight. Let this reflection calm your thoughts, slow your breathing, and bring you peace. Homes are where hearts dwell, where families grow, where life finds meaning. Canopus may be gone, but its homes remind us of what endures. Family, faith, and gratitude. These are the true walls that never fall, and these are the truths that guide us gently to rest. The Nile was the greatest gift to Canopus. Its waters carried life, food, and connection. The Almighty willed this river to flow across the land, spreading sustenance wherever it touched. Without it, Canopus could not have survived, for the city stood at its mouth, where river and sea became one. The people drew their strength from it, planting crops, fishing, and trading through its channels. Archaeologists have found irrigation remains, storage jars, and farming tools that speak of this deep reliance. Each object is a whisper of gratitude, a reminder of how vital the river was. To live at Canopus was to live with the river. Its flow guided their lives, day by day. Its gift was constant, yet never taken for granted. Yet the river was also a force of danger. At times, its floods were too high, drowning fields and damaging homes. At times, the sea rose against the river, bringing salt that spoiled the crops. The Almighty created these tests as a reminder of human fragility. People of Canopus had to adapt, to rebuild, to endure. Archaeologists have traced layers of silt and signs of shifting foundations that reveal these struggles. They show us that life was never easy, even with such a great river. It required patience, resilience, and humility, for blessings and trials often come together. Both are part of life's journey. Farmers learned to read the river's rhythm. They watched the seasons, measured the floods, and planted according to its cycles. Their knowledge was not perfect, but it was born of observation and reliance on the Almighty. When the river rose, they celebrated its renewal. When it fell, they prepared for lean times. Archaeologists uncover sickles, granaries, and traces of fields that reveal this constant labor. The story is clear. Canopus thrived when the river gave, but struggled when the river tested. And in both, the people remembered that provision does not come from water alone, but from the one who commanded it. That truth sustained them across generations. That truth still speaks to us tonight. Fishermen knew the double nature of the waters. On calm days, the river and sea gave an abundance of fish, filling nets with ease. On stormy days, waves crashed, winds howled, and boats risked breaking apart. The Almighty gave provision, but also reminded them of dependence. Archaeologists find net weights and fishing tools beneath the sea, signs of their persistence. Each tool is both a symbol of blessing and a reminder of struggle. Imagine them returning home, baskets full one day, empty the next. Their families waiting, their prayers rising, their trust tested. This was the life of those who lived with the river's gift and danger. A life of faith, patience, and endurance. The harbor itself was shaped by this tension. Calm waters made it a hub of trade, but sudden floods or storms made it perilous. The Almighty set these cycles, and people had to learn humility before them. Stone anchors and remains of docks reveal how they tried to secure their ships against the river's shifts. Sometimes they succeeded, sometimes they did not. Yet in both, they learned lessons. Lessons of preparation, of patience, of rebuilding. Canopus was never only a city of wealth, it was a city of endurance. A city that lived with both gift and danger. A city that teaches us balance. The people of Canopus may have told stories of the river's moods, not to give it power, for power belongs only to the Almighty, but to remember its unpredictability. Stories helped them explain, helped children understand, helped communities prepare. Archaeologists cannot find the words of those stories, but they find the context in artifacts, flood layers, rebuilt walls, emergency granaries. These traces reveal that memory was a tool of survival. Families passed down knowledge, reminding each other of past floods and storms. Through memory, they endured, and through endurance, they thrived for centuries. Their lessons still flow, quietly, like the river itself. The river also carried danger from beyond. Invasions, raids, and conflicts sometimes came through its waters. Canopus, standing at the mouth of the Nile, was vulnerable to what the sea brought. The Almighty tests communities in many ways, and Canopus faced such trials too. Archaeologists find evidence of walls, defenses, and weapons scattered beneath the seabed. These objects remind us that even in a place of blessing, hardship arrives. People defended their homes, cared for their families, and trusted in resilience. Each broken blade, each fallen wall, is a testimony of struggle. A testimony that even in difficulty, life continued. For struggle never erased the city, it only shaped it. Still, the river's gift outweighed its danger. Year after year, crops grew, fish were caught, trade flourished. The Almighty's mercy was clear in the abundance that came. Families gathered at harvest, giving thanks for food and safety. Archaeologists uncover harvest tools and storage pits that tell of these seasons of joy. In these moments, Canopus must have felt secure. People shared meals, markets bustled, children played without fear. The city thrived because the river, by his will, gave life. And that life was celebrated in simple, meaningful ways. In gratitude, in family, in community. When floods came too strong, people rebuilt. When storms destroyed, they repaired. When danger threatened, they endured. The Almighty allowed them strength to rise again. Archaeologists see this resilience in the layers of rebuilding beneath the sea. One wall built, then destroyed, then built again. One field washed away, then planted anew. Canopus was not a city of defeat, it was a city of persistence. Its story is not one of loss, but of endurance. And that endurance still speaks softly, reminding us of patience. The Nile's gift and danger are one lesson, that provision and test come together hand in hand, that blessings are never without responsibility. The Almighty gives, and He also teaches through trial. Canopus lived this truth daily. Its people drew strength from the water, but also humility from its danger. Archaeologists uncover only fragments, but reflection uncovers meaning. And tonight, that meaning soothes us. Life is fragile, yet purposeful. Fragile as water, purposeful as remembrance. The people of Canopus must have measured time by the river's cycles, flood and ebb, abundance and scarcity, calm and storm. The Almighty set these rhythms, and human lives moved within them. Archaeologists uncover layers of soil, showing times of fertility and times of hardship. These layers are history written by water. They remind us that life has always been tied to the natural order created by Him. people watched, adjusted, and remembered. They lived not in control, but in response. And through this response, they learned patience. Patience that still speaks across centuries. At times, entire parts of the city had to be rebuilt. Foundations weakened by floods, walls collapsed by shifting earth. Archaeologists trace these changes in the ruins beneath the sea. Stones reset, bricks replaced, efforts repeated. Each act of rebuilding was an act of hope. The Almighty gave them strength to try again, even when failure was possible. Their hands shaped stone, but their hearts were shaped by endurance. These ruins whisper not only of destruction, but of determination. And in that determination, we see resilience. A resilience that comforts us as we reflect tonight. The danger of water also shaped memory. Parents must have told children about great floods, warning them of the river's power. Stories passed down through generations became lessons. These were not myths of worship, but memories of survival. The Almighty preserved those lessons in human hearts, just as He preserved the traces in the earth. Archaeologists uncover evidence of repeated flooding, confirming what those stories must have told. Through memory, the city prepared for tomorrow, and through memory, it endured longer than it might have otherwise. Memory itself is a gift of guidance and mercy. Fishing families knew the risks more than most. Nets heavy with catch one day, empty the next. Calm waters at dawn, storms by dusk. Their lives were measured in both gratitude and caution. Archaeologists find fishing hooks, weights, and simple boats beneath the waters. They are reminders of reliance, of faith in provision, and of the ever-present uncertainty. The Almighty allowed them both sustenance and test, and through both, they remained steadfast. These tools speak not of wealth, but of perseverance. A perseverance that is as calming as the rhythm of waves. Merchants faced their own challenges. Flooded roads, damaged docks, or delayed ships meant loss. Yet when the river cooperated, trade thrived. The Almighty gave seasons of abundance, reminding people of His mercy. Archaeologists uncover coins and trade goods that prove these cycles, periods of prosperity and periods of hardship intertwined. To live in Canopus was to accept both. Acceptance gave them peace, and that peace still flows to us when we reflect on their story. A peace born from trust in what is given. The harbour itself may have been repaired many times. Docks rebuilt, stones reset, anchors recast. Archaeologists note multiple construction layers, showing repeated effort. Each repair was an acknowledgement. Life by the river was both a blessing and a risk. The Almighty willed its rise and fall, and people lived within that will. In every repair, they affirmed hope. Hope that trade would continue, that families would be sustained, that the city would endure. This hope was not naive, it was resilient. A hope carved into stone and preserved in ruins. A hope that speaks gently even now. During storms, homes must have filled with prayer. Families gathering, seeking safety, listening to the roar of wind and water. Archaeologists cannot uncover those prayers, but we can imagine them. Words lifted in fear, but also in trust. The Almighty is the true protector, and it was to Him they turned. The ruins cannot show us their voices, but reflection allows us to hear them softly. Each storm ended, each family rose again, each day continued. Their endurance is written not in stone, but in faith. Faith that remains an anchor across time. Faith that soothes us as we remember the double nature of the river gift and danger-shaped Canopus into what it was. Its people lived with gratitude, yet never forgot humility. Archaeologists uncover both signs of prosperity and signs of loss. Granaries full, then washed away. Docks built, then broken. This cycle is the story of the city. The Almighty preserved both to remind us that life is balance, that with every blessing comes responsibility, and with every trial comes wisdom. This balance calms us when we reflect. It shows us that struggle and blessing are never far apart. When the city finally slipped beneath the waters, the river had the last word. It carried away voices, walls, and marketplaces. Yet, by the will of the Almighty, it did not erase everything. Fragments remained, preserved in silt, waiting for rediscovery. Archaeologists today read these fragments like pages in a book. Each one adds to the story. Each one restores what was thought lost. The city is silent now, but its silence teaches. It teaches gratitude for what is given and humility for what is taken. Lessons carried by water, remembered in stillness. So the Nile was both the city's lifeline and its challenge. Its gift allowed Canopus to thrive, and its danger shaped the city's destiny. The Almighty created this balance, and through it, people learned. They learned patience, resilience, and gratitude. Archaeologists uncover stones and jars, but reflection uncovers meaning. And that meaning is what soothes us tonight. Life is never only blessing or only trial, it is both. And in both, we find purpose. The story of Canopus at the edge of the Nile reminds us of this truth. A truth that guides us gently toward peace and rest. Faith was a quiet companion to daily life in Canopus. The people who lived there worked, traded, and raised families, yet they also paused to reflect. Gratitude for food, relief after journeys, hope in times of trial, these were part of their rhythm. The Almighty is the source of provision and strength, and it was to Him that hearts turned. Archaeologists may not uncover these prayers in stone, but we can sense them in the stillness of ruins. For where people live, they remember. And where they remember, faith shapes the story. Canopus was no exception. Its silence carries the memory of reflection. Reflection that continues even now. When travelers arrived weary from sea voyages, they sought not only food and rest, but also reassurance. The river had been kind or harsh, storms had passed or threatened. In those moments, people must have lifted their thoughts upward. The Almighty alone grants safety, and in His mercy, travelers reached shore. Archaeological finds of wells and resting places remind us that relief was part of the city's purpose, not only in body, but in spirit. To pause, to give thanks, to breathe deeply after hardship, this was part of what it meant to live at the edge of the Nile. Gratitude was woven into the rhythm of Canopus, a gratitude that lingers in its story, a gratitude that calms us now. Faith in Canopus was not about idols of stone or rituals of grandeur. It was about the human need to seek guidance, to express thanks, to ask for strength. The Almighty does not require monuments to hear hearts. He hears the whispered words of families, the quiet hopes of sailors, the gentle prayers of farmers. Archaeologists find statues and temples, but we remember them not as objects of power, but as human attempts at expression. Stone has no will, no might. True power rests only with the Almighty. The ruins remind us of human searching, not divine presence, and that distinction matters. It keeps our reflection pure. In times of sickness or loss, families surely turned to faith for comfort. Archaeologists uncover jars that may have held herbs, suggesting remedies, but remedies alone were not enough. Healing comes only by the will of the Almighty. Families cared, neighbors supported, and together they asked for mercy. These moments of trial shaped the soul of the city. Not its wealth, not its trade, but its compassion and endurance. The ruins cannot show us their words, but we can imagine them. Soft voices asking for relief, for strength, for patience. These are timeless prayers, heard across ages. Prayers that link their world with ours. The city's resting place is quiet courtyards, shaded corners, open roofs must have been spaces of reflection. People sat, watched the river, listened to the wind. In these pauses, they remembered their place in creation. The Almighty spreads the heavens above, the earth beneath, and water between. Human lives are small, yet meaningful within this vast design. Archaeologists uncover benches, jars, and wells that remind us of these spaces. They are not grand, but they speak of reflection. Reflection that shaped the hearts of Canopus. Reflection that still speaks to us when we remember. Reflection that soothes like a calm tide. Sailors knew the importance of faith more than most. Each journey carried danger, each return was a gift. They must have whispered thanks when the shore of Canopus came into view. The Almighty alone carried them across waters, and it was His mercy that allowed safe passage. Archaeologists find anchors, ropes, and docking stones that remind us of these journeys. Each one represents not only labor, but relief. Imagine the breath taken when sails were lowered, when feet touched land, when family voices were heard again. That breath was gratitude, gratitude that still echoes when we reflect on their lives. Gratitude that invites us to rest, even in moments of abundance. Faith was present. When harvests were rich, when markets thrived, when fish filled the nets, people surely gave thanks. The Almighty provides, and human effort alone cannot guarantee success. Archaeological traces of granaries and storage jars remind us of these seasons. Yet in every full jar, there must have been gratitude. Gratitude for the gift, gratitude for the mercy, gratitude for the chance to share. Prosperity without gratitude is hollow, but with gratitude it becomes peace. Canopus may have fallen, but its lessons in gratitude remain. Lessons that guide us toward calm reflection, lessons that soothe the heart. Faith also shaped how people endured danger. Floods, storms, and invasions tested their strength. Yet in each test, they looked upward. The Almighty commands both trial and mercy, and in both, lessons are found. Archaeologists uncover evidence of rebuilding after floods, of walls repaired after collapse. These are signs of resilience, but behind resilience lies trust. Trust that even hardship carries meaning. Trust that even loss can be a teacher. Canopus endured for centuries because its people did not give up. They lived with both trial and hope. Reflection must have filled the nights of Canopus. Under stars stretched across the delta sky, families sat on rooftops or by courtyards. The same stars we see today lit their evenings. In that light, they remembered their smallness and their place. The Almighty created those stars, steady and unchanging, to guide hearts as well as ships. Archaeologists may not capture that gaze, but we can share it in thought. Looking upward, remembering our Creator, feeling peace. The people of Canopus must have felt it too. A peace that unites us across time. A peace that lingers even now. Faith and reflection were not separate from daily life, they were woven into it. In work, in meals, in rest, and in trial, people turned their thoughts to the Almighty. Archaeologists find objects of clay and stone, but reflection finds meaning beyond them. The story of Canopus is not only of trade and fall, but of faith in the midst of both. That is why it soothes us when remembered. It reminds us that history is not only about what is built and lost, but about what is believed and endured. Faith gave Canopus strength, reflection gave it calm, and those same gifts are offered to us tonight, quietly, gently, through memory. In times of loss, reflection must have been especially strong. When families buried loved ones, or when homes were damaged by floods, hearts turned upward. The Almighty alone grants life and takes it away, and in Him alone rests comfort. Archaeologists may uncover burial grounds or broken walls, but they cannot uncover the tears, the prayers, or the patience. Yet we know they must have been there. People everywhere seek comfort in hardship, and the people of Canopus were no different. Their faith allowed them to endure what their strength could not. Their reflection gave them calm when fear threatened. These invisible traces are as important as the ruins themselves. They complete the city's story. The presence of temples and statues in Canopus can be misleading if misunderstood. To the archaeologist, they are evidence of culture and tradition. To us, they are reminders that people have always searched for meaning, but stone holds no power. The Almighty alone holds power. When we reflect on these remains, we separate history from belief. We see them as human attempts, not as divine truth. And in that distinction lies clarity. Clarity that allows us to learn without confusion. Clarity that keeps our remembrance pure. Faith is also found in gratitude during ordinary days. A harvest gathered, a child healthy, a journey safely ended. These are not grand moments, yet they fill life with meaning. The Almighty provides in small blessings as well as great ones. Archaeologists uncover cooking pots, children's toys, and resting places that remind us of these daily mercies. Each object whispers, they lived, they loved, they gave thanks, and in those whispers we find calm. Gratitude is timeless. It connected Canopus to its creator, and it connects us to him now. A bond unbroken by centuries. We may also reflect on how silence itself was part of faith. After long days, when lamps dimmed and families settled, the city must have grown still. In that stillness, hearts remembered. The Almighty created silence as a blessing, allowing minds to rest and souls to reflect. Archaeologists cannot preserve silence, but we can. As we think of Canopus, we imagine the hush of its nights, the soft sound of water, the faint flicker of lamps, the quiet voices of prayer. That silence carries peace, peace that survives even when stone crumbles. The ruins beneath the sea hold no living voices, yet they call us to reflection. Divers uncover broken walls, fallen columns, and scattered objects. But when we reflect, we see beyond them. We see families giving thanks, neighbors supporting one another, sailors whispering prayers of safety. The Almighty allowed these fragments to remain not as idols, but as lessons. Lessons of gratitude, humility, and trust. Canopus is gone, but its memory is a teacher, and tonight it teaches us gently, guiding us into calm, guiding us toward rest. Reflection is also found in remembrance of creation. The river flowing, the sea stretching wide, the stars shining above. The Almighty placed these signs for all people in every time. The people of Canopus saw them as we do. Their lives may have been harder, their tools simpler, but their gaze upward was the same. Archaeologists study the earth, but reflection studies the soul. Both reveal truths. one through fragments of stone, the other through whispers of memory. Together, they remind us that history is never only in the past, it is alive in thought. Alive tonight, as we remember. When we think of Canopus, we are not only recalling a sunken city, we are recalling human beings who sought meaning, who gave thanks, who endured trials. The Almighty allowed their story to unfold, and He allowed it to be remembered. Archaeologists uncover the material, but it is reflection that uncovers the heart, and that heart is what soothes us, not in noise, but in quiet, not in grandeur, but in simplicity. Canopus was a city, but also a reminder that faith and reflection outlast stone, a reminder that endures even now. Faith in Canopus was not perfect, but it was human. People stumbled, as all do, yet they continued to seek, to hope, to give thanks. The Almighty judges with wisdom, and His mercy covers generations. Archaeologists cannot measure faith, but they can measure endurance. And endurance is always tied to belief. For without trust, there is no patience. Without patience, there is no survival. Canopus endured for centuries because its people believed in something greater than themselves. That truth still whispers beneath the waves. A whisper that calms us tonight. The story of Canopus teaches us that faith and reflection are not separate from history. They are history. They are what give ruins meaning, what give fragments life, what give silence a voice. The Almighty preserved Canopus, not to glorify stone, but to remind us of humility, to remind us that life is brief, but purpose endures. Archaeologists uncover the evidence, but remembrance uncovers the wisdom. Wisdom that soothes, wisdom that calms, wisdom that invites us to rest. And rest is the gift we seek tonight. So we close this segment on faith and reflection. Canopus lies beneath the sea, silent but not forgotten. Its ruins remind us of trade, of homes, of trials, but above all, of hearts that sought meaning. The Almighty allowed their story to survive, and He allows us to reflect on it now. Let that reflection ease your thoughts, slow your breathing, and guide you gently. History does not have to be loud to be powerful. It can be soft, patient, and calm, like waves upon the shore, like faith remembered in silence, like rest arriving at the end of the day. For centuries Canopus lay hidden beneath the waters, forgotten by the world above. Fishermen sailed over its ruins without knowing what lay below. The waves moved calmly, guarding the silence of a city lost. The Almighty willed that it remain unseen until the right time, and so, for generations, it rested quietly. The memory faded from common knowledge, but never disappeared entirely. Old writings hinted at its existence, speaking of a city once vibrant, yet no one could point to its stones. It was a story waiting to be found again, a story preserved for us to reflect upon. In modern times, curiosity grew about the lost cities of the Nile Delta. Historians read ancient texts, searching for clues. Explorers wondered if the sea held more than fish and sand. The Almighty places knowledge in human hearts, and that knowledge drives the search for truth. Archaeologists began to suspect that beneath the waters near Alexandria lay hidden worlds. They studied currents, mapped the seabed, and followed every hint. Slowly, the pieces began to fit. A city long thought gone might still be there, not vanished, but concealed, waiting in patience. The rediscovery of Canopus began with dives into the Mediterranean depths. Divers equipped with lights and tools descended into the murky waters. At first, they saw only silt, rocks, and shadows. But then, outlines began to emerge, straight lines where nature makes curves, blocks of stone where no reef should grow. The Almighty preserved these traces beneath the waves, allowing them to endure centuries unseen. With careful hands, divers brushed away the sand, and the city began to reveal itself, stone by stone, piece by piece. The moment of first discovery must have been awe-inspiring, divers touching walls unseen for more than 1,000 years. Pottery lifted from the seabed, still intact despite the weight of water. Statues slowly emerging, their faces softened by time. These were not just objects, they were voices. Voices of people who had lived, worked, and rested in Canopuses. Archaeologists treated them not as treasures of wealth, but treasures of memory. The Almighty allowed their survival so that we might remember, and in remembering, reflect. Reflection is the true gift of discovery. The work of rediscovery was patient and careful. Archaeologists used brushes, ropes, and tools to lift fragile pieces. Each fragment was recorded, measured, and preserved. It was not a rush for riches, but a respectful unveiling. The Almighty gave them skill and patience for this task, and through it, the city spoke again. Jars, anchors, coins, and statues surfaced. Each one added a piece to the puzzle. Each one turned silence into story. The city was no longer only in books. It was alive in evidence. Among the most striking finds were statues of stone. Some lay broken, others stood upright, as if waiting. They were not divine in themselves, but expressions of human artistry. The Almighty gives skill to hands and vision to minds, and through that, beauty is shaped. These statues, softened by the sea, tell us of the effort and creativity of Canopus. Archaeologists raised them carefully, respecting their fragility. Today, they stand not as objects of worship, but as lessons of history. Lessons about what people valued, what they created, what they left behind. Silent teachers, speaking without words, speaking through time. Coins were also uncovered, stamped with symbols of their era. They told of trade, of rulers, of exchange. Each coin passed through countless hands before resting on the seabed. The Almighty preserved them, not for wealth, but for memory. Archaeologists studied their marks, reading them like pages in a book. Through them, they learned of connections between Canopus and distant lands. These coins are no longer currency, but evidence. Evidence of community, of exchange, of humanity. Small in size, but vast in meaning. Carried across time for us to reflect upon. Tools of daily life also surfaced. Fishing nets weighted with stones, cooking pots still whole, lamps that once glowed in the evenings. Each item ordinary, yet extraordinary in what it reveals. The Almighty allowed these simple things to endure, so that their story could continue. Archaeologists treated them with the same respect as grand statues, for history is not only in monuments, but in meals, in nets, in lamps. These fragments remind us of people living daily lives with patience. They remind us of endurance, of family, of care, and in their simplicity, they calm us. Quiet echoes of human life. The rediscovery of Canopus also revealed structures, walls, roads, and foundations. Divers traced their outlines, realizing they were walking the streets of a city beneath the sea. These stones had once supported homes, markets, and temples. They carried footsteps, voices, and stories. The Almighty allowed them to remain when so much else was lost. In the silence of the deep, they became markers of memory. Archaeologists mapped them carefully, preserving their layout. The city was not whole, but it was present. Enough remained to remind us of its life, enough to give us reflection. The news of the rediscovery spread across the world. People marveled at the thought of a city lost for centuries, now returned to memory. Museums displayed the finds, documentaries told the story, and curiosity grew. Yet beyond the excitement lies a softer truth. The Almighty preserved Canopus, not only for scholars, but for hearts willing to reflect. Its rediscovery is not just about history, it is about humility. Humility before time, humility before loss, humility before the one who allows both. In that humility we find calm. Calm that soothes like the sea itself, calm that invites rest. The rediscovery of Canopus also required teamwork. Divers, archaeologists, historians, and local guides worked together. Each person brought knowledge, skill, and patience. The Almighty gives people different strengths, and through cooperation, they achieved what none could do alone. The story of rediscovery is not only about artifacts, it is about human unity. Unity in pursuit of knowledge, unity in respect for the past, unity in reflection. Each diver's light revealed more of the city, but together they brought it back to memory. This teamwork is itself a lesson, a reminder that we are stronger when we act together, stronger when guided by purpose. Technology also played its part. Sonar mapping, underwater cameras, and careful lifting devices helped reveal the city. These tools were not powerful by themselves, but through the Almighty's will, they became means of discovery. Archaeologists combined ancient knowledge with modern methods. The result was breathtaking. The outlines of streets, the shapes of temples, the fragments of homes. Each image on a screen was more than data, was memory returned. A memory preserved for centuries, waiting for the right time. A memory now visible to the world. Technology served reflection. Reflection served peace. The rediscovery was not only scientific, it was emotional. Divers spoke of awe when touching stones unseen for over 1,000 years. They described the feeling of connection as though walking beside people long gone. This was not worship of the past, but respect for its endurance. The Almighty allowed them to feel humility in that moment, a humility that brings peace. Archaeologists often say the silence underwater is profound. In that silence, Canopus speaks. Not in words, but in presence. Presence that says, we lived, we worked, we endured. Presence that lingers in memory. Museums now display many of the finds from Canopus. Visitors walk past statues, jars, and coins, marveling at their survival. Yet the objects themselves have no power. They are lessons, not idols. The Almighty preserved them so that people could remember. Children look at them with wonder, adults with reflection, scholars with study. Each person takes something different, but all are touched by the same truth. History is fragile, yet enduring. Canopus may be underwater, but in memory it rises again, rises not in stone, but in thought. Thought that calms as it teaches. The rediscovery also deepened our knowledge of the Nile Delta itself. Archaeologists saw how land and water shifted, how earthquakes reshaped the earth, how the sea slowly claimed the shore. These are signs of the Almighty's power, reminders of human fragility. Canopus was not lost by accident, it was part of a larger design, and in that design lies wisdom. Wisdom about impermanence, about patience, about humility. The city's rediscovery gives us perspective. Perspective that is both historical and spiritual. Perspective that soothes us as we listen tonight. perspective that turns ruins into teachers. For the local people near Alexandria, the rediscovery was also personal. Their waters, their coastline, their heritage now carried new meaning. Fishermen who had sailed above Canopus for years now knew what lay beneath. The Almighty chose their home to guard this memory. Pride and curiosity filled their hearts, not for wealth, but for connection. Connection to ancestors, to history, to the rhythm of time. Archaeologists worked alongside them, respecting the trust of place. Together, they honored the city, and together, they reminded us that history belongs to all, not just to scholars. It belongs to memory. The rediscovery of Canopus also sparked reflection on how much is still hidden. If one city lay beneath the sea for centuries, how many more rest unseen? The Almighty holds knowledge, and He reveals it when He wills. Archaeologists continue to search, diving deeper, mapping further, hoping for more discoveries. Yet, what has been found already is enough to remind us of truth. That human works pass, but lessons endure. That memory can be lost, but also returned. And that reflection is always possible, even in silence. Canopus is proof of that. Proof lying quietly beneath the waves. Rediscovery did not make Canopus whole again. It remains broken, scattered, incomplete. Yet that incompleteness is its beauty. The Almighty preserved just enough for us to remember, not to rebuild. We are not meant to restore it fully, but to reflect upon it. Archaeologists accept this, treating fragments as treasures of knowledge, not objects of possession. Each piece is valuable because it carries meaning. Meaning that no storm or flood could erase. Meaning that still calms us tonight. Calm in fragments, calm in reflection. The story of rediscovery also teaches humility to modern people. We build cities, we advance technology, we think our work's permanent. Yet Canopus reminds us otherwise. The Almighty alone decides what endures. Archaeologists, lifting fragments from the sea, remind us that one day, our works too may be ruins. This truth is not frightening, it is calming. It places life in perspective. It invites us to gratitude. Gratitude for the present, for the blessings we have, for the memories we create. Gratitude that outlasts stone. So we close this segment on rediscovery. Canopus lay hidden for centuries, then emerged again in our time. Archaeologists, divers, and communities worked together, guided by patience and mercy. The Almighty allowed this rediscovery, not for pride, but for remembrance. And remembrance is what we hold tonight. The city rises in thought, its ruins becoming whispers of peace. Let those whispers settle in your heart. Let them quiet your mind. For history is not only about what is lost, it is about what returns. Returns gently, like rest after a long day. When archaeologists lifted objects from the seabed of Canopus, they did more than recover stone and clay. They recovered voices, not voices in sound, but voices in memory. Each object speaks softly, carrying a story across time. The Almighty preserved these fragments so that we might reflect on them today. They do not hold power themselves, they are reminders. Reminders of families, of work, of daily rhythms. To hold such an object is to touch the echo of a life once lived. And that echo is history's true treasure. Gentle, fragile, enduring. Coins discovered in Canopus are among the most telling. Small discs of metal, marked with designs and inscriptions. They once passed through countless hands farmers, merchants, sailors, travelers. The Almighty preserved them, not for wealth, but for knowledge. Archaeologists study the marks, tracing trade routes and connections. Each coin speaks of exchange, of community, of trust. Though their material value is gone, their meaning endures. They remind us that commerce was not only about goods, but about relationships. Relationships built on effort and trust. Trust that still speaks through metal softened by time. Pottery is another voice from the deep. Jars that once held grain, amphorae that carried oil, bowls that served meals. These vessels were ordinary, yet essential. The Almighty allowed them to endure, while flesh and voice faded. Archaeologists find them whole or in fragments, piecing them back together. Each shard is a syllable, each jar a sentence in the story of Canopus. They tell us of kitchens alive with labor, markets filled with goods, families gathered in meals. Pottery does not dazzle with grandeur, but it whispers of life. And those whispers calm us, for they remind us of the value of the ordinary that endures. Statues have also been raised from the seabed. Some are tall and striking, others small and humble. They are not idols, they are stone. The Almighty alone is to be worshipped, and stone has no power. But as works of human artistry, they carry meaning. They reveal the effort of hands, the patience of carving, the desire to express. Archaeologists treat them not as objects of devotion, but as evidence of creativity. Their broken forms speak of both fragility and endurance. They remind us that human expression is fleeting, yet its trace can last for centuries. Silent figures, whispering lessons, anchors uncovered near the harbor speak of journeys. Heavy stones and lead weights once held ships steady against currents. The Almighty gave wisdom to sailors to shape and use them. Now they rest beneath the sea, no longer guiding ships, but guiding memory. Each anchor tells of boats arriving, of goods exchanged, of travelers resting. Archaeologists lift them with care, knowing they are more than tools. They are symbols of stability, of connection, of hope in uncertain waters. Anchors once steadied ships, now they steady thought. A calm reminder of journeys past. Lamps are another fragile but powerful voice. Small clay vessels that once held oil, burning softly in the night. Their light had no power of its own. The Almighty created flame and allowed it to shine. But in those flames, families found comfort. Archaeologists find lamps blackened by use, their edges worn smooth. Each lamp whispers of evenings in Canopus, meals shared, stories told, prayers lifted. They remind us that even the smallest light carries meaning. Darkness cannot erase it, and memory cannot forget it. Lamps of clay, shining still through reflection. Tools of labor also speak from the silence. Fishing weights, chisels, grinding stones, weaving looms. Each one carried the mark of human effort. The Almighty gave hands their strength and skill, and these tools became their partners. Archaeologists uncover them, small and humble, yet filled with meaning. They tell us of fishermen on the shore, craftsmen at their benches, farmers in their fields. Tools do not shout, they whisper. They whisper of diligence, of perseverance, of trust in provision. And in their whisper we hear calm, calm that drifts like a tide into our hearts. Jewelry has also been found in Canopus. Rings, beads, and ornaments, worn by people who once walked its streets. They were not sources of power, but expressions of beauty and care. The Almighty gives people the desire to adorn, to honor, to celebrate. Archaeologists find these pieces, delicate yet enduring. They tell us of moments of joy, of gifts exchanged, of love remembered. Jewelry does not change history, but it reflects humanity, humanity seeking beauty in daily life. And that seeking still speaks to us. A gentle reminder that joy is part of survival. Stone blocks, once part of walls and streets, also speak. They are silent in themselves, yet they carry the weight of countless footsteps. The Almighty allowed them to remain beneath the waves, a foundation for memory. Archaeologists map them carefully, tracing the outlines of homes and markets. Each block is a word in the sentence of the city. Together, they form chapters of life. People walked, worked, and rested upon them. Now we reflect upon them, piecing their story back together. The stones do not speak loudly, they whisper. And their whisper is enough. Even broken fragments have a voice. A chipped pot, a shattered statue, a cracked anchor. These are not failures, they are survivors. The Almighty allowed them to remain, not whole, but sufficient. Archaeologists lift them gently, for even in brokenness, meaning endures. They remind us that history does not need perfection to teach. It needs memory, and memory is preserved even in fragments. Canopus may lie in pieces, but each piece speaks. Each piece carries reflection. Each piece carries calm. Wooden remains have also been found in the ruins of Canopus. Fragments of boats, beams from homes, and pieces of furniture preserved in silt. Wood is fragile, yet the Almighty allowed parts of it to survive beneath the waters. Archaeologists treat these fragments carefully, for they are rare voices of the past. They tell us of ships that once carried families, of homes built with care, of daily life supported by timber. Each piece is humble, yet precious. A reminder that nothing is too small to matter in history. Even a splinter of wood carries memory. Memory of effort, of shelter, of survival. Memory that whispers gently to us tonight. Seals and inscriptions uncovered from Canopus also speak. Marks pressed into clay, symbols carved into stone, writing left as identifiers. These were tools of record, proof of trade, signs of ownership. The Almighty gave people knowledge of writing, and through it, memory became stronger. Archaeologists study these marks, tracing names long forgotten, connections long unseen. Each line carved is a voice calling across centuries. A voice saying, "We were here, we lived." The seals no longer serve commerce, but they still serve remembrance. Remembrance that carries calm into our reflection. Remembrance that steadies the heart. Weights and measures found in Canopus reveal fairness in trade. Small stones, shaped and balanced, used to measure grain, oil, and goods. These objects tell us that people cared about justice in exchange. The Almighty commands fairness, and in these tools we see obedience to that value. Archaeologists find them simple, yet profound. They are not treasure, but testimony. Testimony that even in markets, principles mattered. Testimony that commerce was not only about profit, but about trust. These stones whisper of honesty, honesty that still soothes us when remembered. Cooking utensils uncovered from the ruins also speak. Pots blackened by fire, pestles worn smooth, jars stained from use. These were not ornaments, but instruments of nourishment. The Almighty provides food, but people prepare it with care and share it with gratitude. Archaeologists see these objects as windows into kitchens long gone. Kitchens filled with warmth, with voices, with love. Each tool tells of meals once shared, of families once gathered. They remind us that survival is not only about work, but also about care. Care that gives meaning to life. Care that calms the soul. Even discarded items speak. Broken tools, cracked jars, fragments thrown aside. To archaeologists, these are treasures, for they tell of use and change. The Almighty allowed even what was thrown away to survive, so that lessons could be preserved. These fragments remind us that nothing in life is wasted when it carries meaning. A chipped bowl tells us of a meal. A broken lamp tells us of a night once lit. Small things, overlooked then, remembered now. History is not always in greatness, it is often in the humble that endures, the humble that calms. Jewels buried in the seabed still shine faintly, not as wealth, but as memory of joy. Rings that once marked a bond, beads that once decorated a garment, ornaments that once celebrated a day. The Almighty creates beauty, and humans reflect it in small ways. Archaeologists find these jewels delicate, yet enduring. They tell us of love, of celebration, of moments of happiness. These objects do not dazzle us with power, but with connection. Connection to people who valued beauty as we do. Connection that survives in fragments. Fragments that whisper joy. Bones of animals found in the ruins also speak softly. Remains of meals, traces of herds, signs of diet. The Almighty provides creatures for sustenance, and these remains are evidence of that provision. Archaeologists study them to learn what families ate, how they lived, what they raised. They are not grim, they are natural reminders of survival. They tell us that Canopus was not only stone, but flesh and breath. That meals were not only cooked, but lived. In these bones, we see dependence, gratitude, and life. And in their silence, we hear calm. Calm carried through memory. Glass vessels have also been raised from the seabed. Fragile, translucent, shaped by fire and breath. They once held oils, perfumes, or simple water. The Almighty gave people creativity, and glass was one of their marvels. Archaeologists marvel too, lifting these vessels carefully. They sparkle even after centuries, like drops of frozen light. Each vessel tells of care, of craft, of daily use. They remind us that even fragile things can endure. Endure not for their strength, but for their meaning. Meaning that softens reflection like a glow in the night. Metal tools and ornaments also lie beneath the sea. Rusted, bent, worn, yet recognizable. The Almighty gave knowledge of metal, and people shaped it for work and for beauty. Archaeologists find knives, chisels, and adornments. They tell us of labor and art, of struggle and care. These objects whisper two truths at once. Life was difficult, and life was meaningful. The rust does not erase the story, it only adds to it. For endurance is not about perfection, it is about survival. Survival that teaches calm. All these objects together form a chorus. Coins, pottery, statues, anchors, lamps, tools, jewelry, and fragments. Each one speaks, not loudly, but gently. The Almighty preserved them, not for worship, but for remembrance. Archaeologists uncover them, but reflection gives them voice. Voice that tells us of families, of work, of gratitude, of struggle. Canopus may be gone, but its objects still speak. They speak to us tonight, in whispers that calm the mind, whispers that remind us of life's fragility and life's meaning, whispers that guide us toward rest. The city of Canopus rests beneath the sea, but its silence is not empty. From the deep, lessons rise. Lessons about fragility, endurance, and humility. The Almighty willed that its ruins survive, so that we may reflect. Archaeologists uncover stones and objects, but what they reveal is more than history. It is wisdom. Wisdom about the limits of human effort. Wisdom about the value of patience. Wisdom about the importance of gratitude. These lessons flow gently from the deep, like currents carrying memory, currents that reach us tonight. The first lesson is that nothing built by human hands is permanent. Walls fall, markets sink, harbors vanish. Canopus was once full of life, now it lies silent beneath waves. The Almighty alone decides what endures. Archaeologists remind us that even the strongest stone weakens in time. Yet this is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for humility. To live knowing that strength is fleeting, but purpose can last. Canopus teaches us that what remains is not buildings, but lessons. Lessons preserved in memory. Another lesson is resilience. Though floods came, people rebuilt. Though storms struck, they endured. Though danger arrived, they adapted. The Almighty gave them patience, and through patience, they survived for centuries. Archaeologists uncover layer upon layer of rebuilding, each one proof of determination. Canopus did not surrender easily, it lived with endurance. This endurance is a message for us too, a message of steady hearts in the face of trial. The deep also teaches us gratitude. When the river gave, families rejoiced. When the sea offered fish, they gave thanks. The Almighty provides, and they remembered it with gratitude. Archaeologists find storage jars and fishing tools, but reflection finds meaning. Meaning that says, provision is mercy. Gratitude turns provision into peace. Without gratitude, abundance feels hollow. With gratitude, even little feels full. Canopus reminds us of this balance. The ruins beneath the sea remind us of time's power. Centuries erased voices, but not entirely. The Almighty allowed fragments to remain, teaching that memory outlasts silence. Archaeologists lift coins, lamps, and anchors from the seabed. They are not whole, but enough. Enough to tell us that life once thrived, enough to guide reflection. Time humbles us, but also teaches us. It teaches us that nothing is too small to be remembered. Even fragments carry wisdom. Even silence carries lessons. Another lesson from the deep is community. Canopus thrived not through rulers alone, but through families, workers, and neighbors. Archaeologists uncover tools of daily labor, not only monuments. These objects remind us that cities stand because of countless unnamed people. The Almighty values sincerity over grandeur, and their sincerity endured. Each tool, each shard, is a testimony of ordinary lives. Ordinary, yet meaningful. Canopus teaches us that history is not only about kings, it is about communities. And communities are what give life its depth. Communities are what endure. The deep also teaches humility before creation. The sea rose, the earth shifted, and the city fell. The Almighty controls all of it, reminding humans of their limits. Archaeologists see the evidence of earthquakes and floods in the ruins. These are not accidents, they are signs. Signs that remind us not to cling too tightly to what we build. Signs that remind us that safety lies not in stone, but in trust. Canopus is a lesson in this humility. Humility that quiets pride and opens hearts to reflection. Humility that soothes us now. From the silence of Canopus comes the lesson of memory itself. Forgotten for centuries, rediscovered in our time, its story shows that memory can return. The Almighty preserved it, waiting until knowledge and patience aligned. Archaeologists uncovered what was hidden, but reflection uncovered why it matters. Canopus teaches us that nothing is truly lost if remembrance survives. Memory is not about possession, it is about reflection. And reflection is what gives history its meaning. That meaning is what calms us tonight. Soft, steady, like a tide, carrying us into rest. The city also teaches us about balance. Gift and danger came together in the river. Provision and test came together in the sea. The Almighty designs life this way so that people may learn. Archaeologists uncover both abundance and hardship in Canopus. Full granaries and destroyed walls, coins of trade and anchors of wrecked ships. This balance is the city's story. It teaches us that life is never only ease or only trial. It is both, and in both there is wisdom. Finally, the deep teaches us peace. Though the city lies broken, it rests quietly. Its ruins are not loud, they are calm. The Almighty allowed them to settle beneath waves, where silence reigns. Archaeologists disturb them only to learn, not to claim. And what they find teaches us peace. Peace in reflection, peace in humility, peace in gratitude. Canopus speaks not in shouts, but in whispers. Whispers that calm the mind, ease the heart, and invite rest. Whispers that soothe us tonight. The lesson of impermanence is clear in Canopus. Once a thriving city, now only ruins beneath water. The Almighty reminds us through it that nothing lasts forever except His will. Archaeologists study the fallen stones, and in them they read the passing of time. Each fragment says, "Build, but do not be arrogant. Work, but do not forget humility." Canopus was proud once, yet now it is silent. That silence is not failure, is wisdom. Wisdom that teaches us to live with perspective. Perspective that gives peace. Canopus also teaches the lesson of patience. Generations lived by the cycles of river and sea, enduring hardship and celebrating abundance. The Almighty set these cycles, and people adapted. Archaeologists uncover tools worn smooth from years of use. They tell us of hands that worked daily, waiting for results. This patience was not easy, but it was necessary. And in patience, they found strength. Canopus whispers, wait, endure, trust. Lessons we still need today. Lessons that soothe restless hearts. Another lesson from the deep is that value lies in the ordinary. Coins, pots, lamps, and tools, simple things, tell us more than monuments. The Almighty preserved them while greater structures fell. Archaeologists see in them the real life of Canopus. Families, meals, laughter, struggles. The ordinary is what endures. Canopus reminds us that life's true meaning is found not in grandeur, but in the daily. And in remembering that, we find calm, calm in the small, calm in the simple, calm that lingers tonight. The ruins also teach us compassion. Neighbors must have supported one another during floods, storms, and hardship. The Almighty commands mercy, and their survival depended on it. Archaeologists uncover storage spaces and shared wells, signs of cooperation. These are not just structures, they are testimonies. Testimonies of kindness in action. Canopus shows us that compassion builds communities as much as stone does. And compassion is what endures beyond collapse. Its memory invites us to kindness today. Kindness that soothes like calm water. There is also the lesson of gratitude in hardship. Even when crops failed or storms struck, families still found reasons to give thanks. The Almighty provides in all circumstances, and hearts that remember this find peace. Archaeologists uncover evidence of rebuilding after destruction. That rebuilding was gratitude in action, gratitude that did not give up, gratitude that turned loss into endurance. Canopus whispers this truth: give thanks in all conditions. Gratitude turns burden into patience. Gratitude turns trial into wisdom. Gratitude calms the soul. From the deep, we also learn humility in knowledge. Archaeologists uncover much, but never everything. The Almighty alone holds all knowledge. What is revealed is what He wills, when He wills. Canopus reminds us of this limit. We may study, but we cannot control. We may discover, but not fully grasp. And that humility keeps us balanced. Balanced between curiosity and faith. Balanced between effort and surrender. The ruins whisper the lesson of continuity. Though centuries have passed, their story still touches us. The Almighty preserved them so that memory could continue. Archaeologists bring fragments into museums, but the true continuity is in reflection. When we think of Canopus, we join its story. Its silence becomes our meditation, its endurance our teacher. This continuity shows us that history is not dead. It is alive in memory. Memory that connects us to the past and to each other. Memory that brings peace. Another lesson is that loss can be gentle. Canopus did not vanish in one violent moment. It slipped gradually beneath the waves, settling into rest. The Almighty allowed its passing to be quiet. Archaeologists read this in the layers of silt. Slowly, calmly, the city yielded to time. This gentleness teaches us that endings need not be harsh. They can be calm, like sleep. Canopus reminds us that loss is part of life's rhythm, and in that rhythm there is peace. From Canopus, we also learn that silence is not emptiness. The city is silent now, but its silence is full. Full of memory, full of reflection, full of meaning. The Almighty made silence as a blessing, a space for hearts to rest. Archaeologists uncover material evidence, but silence uncovers spiritual wisdom. Canopus rests, and in its rest, it speaks. It tells us that stillness can be rich, not barren, that silence can teach as much as sound, that silence can guide us to calm, calm that leads to sleep. So the lessons from the deep are many. Fragility, patience, gratitude, compassion, humility, continuity, and peace. The Almighty preserved Canopus to remind us of these truths. Archaeologists lift stones, but reflection lifts wisdom, and wisdom soothes the restless soul. Canopus is gone as a city, but alive as a teacher in fragments, in silence, in whispers. Tonight, we listen to those whispers. We let them calm us, guide us, and ease us, until rest arrives, soft as the sea. The story of Canopus has carried us across time, from bustling markets to silent ruins beneath the sea. We have listened to its echoes, traced its fragments, and reflected on its lessons. The Almighty preserved this city not to glorify stone, but to guide hearts toward humility. Archaeologists uncover what remains, but reflection uncovers why it matters. Tonight, as we close, we hold the city gently in memory, not as a monument, but as a whisper that calms the heart, a whisper that guides us toward rest, soft, steady, enduring, like the tide itself. Canopus reminds us that life is fragile. Buildings fall, walls crumble, voices fade, yet meaning endures, carried by memory. The Almighty alone decides what remains, and He allowed fragments of Canopus to survive for us. Archaeologists read these fragments, but it is reflection that turns them into wisdom, wisdom that soothes restless thoughts, wisdom that invites calm. Life is short, but purpose lasts, and purpose is what we carry forward. Purpose that rests with us tonight. The city also reminds us of gratitude. Families once lived by the river's gift, enduring its trials, celebrating its blessings. They gave thanks for what they had, even when it was little. The Almighty provides, and in gratitude, hearts found peace. Archaeologists uncover jars, nets, and tools that tell this story. They are not grand, but they are meaningful. Meaning lies not in wealth, but in remembrance. Canopus teaches us that gratitude turns hardship into strength. Gratitude is timeless, and it calms us even now. As we think of Canopus, we also think of endurance. For centuries, the city stood, rebuilt after floods, restored after storms, revived after hardship. The Almighty gave its people patience, and that patience carried them. Archaeologists see this endurance in layers of stone, one wall upon another, one repair after the next. The city did not give up, and though it now lies beneath the sea, it still does not give up. It endures in memory, endures in lesson, endures in reflection, and through that endurance we are calmed. The silence of Canopus is its final gift. The city no longer speaks in voices, but in whispers. Whispers carried by the sea, whispers lifted by reflection. The Almighty created silence as a blessing, and in the silence of ruins we find rest. Archaeologists uncover the stones, but silence uncovers the peace. Peace that lingers across centuries. Peace that flows through memory. Peace that invites us to breathe deeply, slowly, gently. Canopus rests, and in its rest, we too may find rest. The story does not end with Canopus alone. It joins the larger story of humanity, of cities rising and falling, of families living and enduring. The Almighty writes these stories in time, and we are readers of them. Archaeologists uncover one chapter, but countless others remain. This is not a reason for worry, it is a reason for wonder. Wonder that calms, not agitates. Wonder that opens the heart to reflection. Canopus is one story among many, yet tonight it is enough. Enough to remind us, enough to soothe us. As we close, we remember that history is not only about the past, it is also about how we live now. The Almighty preserved these ruins not only for scholars, but for us, to reflect on gratitude, patience, humility, and peace. Archaeologists uncover fragments, but we uncover meaning in thought. Meaning that shapes how we see our own lives, our homes, our families, our moments of quiet gratitude. These are our Canopus, these are what endure, and in remembering them, we are calmed into stillness. The night itself mirrors Canopus. Quiet, deep, filled with whispers. The Almighty made night for rest, and Canopus rests within it. Archaeologists dive into the sea to study, but we dive into thought to rest. Both uncover treasures, theirs in stone, ours in calm. As waves move softly, so do our minds. As silence covers ruins, so does peace cover us. Night is a gift we now embrace. So let us take the lessons of Canopus gently, not as burdens, but as comforts. The Almighty allowed this story to be preserved, not for weight, but for calm. Archaeologists give us knowledge, but remembrance gives us peace. Peace that is soft, steady, and enduring. Like the tide, like the stars, like the silence of ruins, Canopus rests beneath the sea. Its story rests within us, and we rest within the mercy of the Almighty. Rest that soothes. Now, as you listen to these final words, Let your breathing slow. Let your body grow heavier, your thoughts quieter, your heart lighter. The Almighty created rest, and He grants it now. Archaeologists uncovered Canopus, but He uncovers peace. Let the story fade into silence, like waves upon the shore. Let the lessons remain, but the noise drift away. The city rests, the sea rests, the night rests, and so may you. Rest gently, rest deeply, rest peacefully, until morning comes with new mercy. The story of Canopus has carried us across rivers, markets, homes, and memories. Now it carries us into quiet. The Almighty wrote its rise and fall, and through it, He wrote lessons for us. Archaeologists reveal fragments, but remembrance reveals wisdom. Wisdom that rests not in stone, but in hearts. Tonight, we hold that wisdom gently, not as noise, but as calm. Canopus is no longer a city, it is a reflection that soothes like waves, a reflection that carries us to rest. Imagine the ruins beneath the sea, silent, untouched, still. Fish move through fallen walls, currents stir grains of sand, light filters faintly from above. The Almighty allowed this calm burial, a resting place beneath waters. Archaeologists dive with lights, but the true illumination is in thought, in seeing silence as a blessing, in feeling rest as a gift. Canopus sleeps, and in its sleep it teaches. It teaches us that endings are not to be feared. Endings are part of peace, peace that flows like water. The calm of Canopus joins the calm of night. Both are vast, both are steady, both are merciful. The Almighty spreads night as a cover, a shelter for the weary. Just as He allowed Canopus to rest beneath the waves, He allows us to rest upon the earth. Archaeologists uncover ruins by day, but by night we uncover peace. Peace in reflection, peace in stillness, peace in surrender. Night is not emptiness, is mercy. Mercy for hearts that long for rest. Mercy that soothes with silence. Silence that invites sleep. As we end this journey, we carry its lessons lightly. Gratitude for what we have, patience in what we face, humility in what we build. The Almighty preserved Canopus to remind us of these truths. Archaeologists study the stones, but we study the meaning. Meaning that steadies the heart, meaning that softens the mind, meaning that guides us to peace. The city rests, the sea rests, the night rests, and now, so do we. Rest with calm assurance. Every fragment of Canopus whispers a blessing, not a blessing of stone, but a blessing of thought. The Almighty allows us to learn from ruins, to find peace in remembrance. Archaeologists gather the pieces, but we gather the lessons. Lessons that shape not only knowledge, but calm. Lessons that drift into our minds like a tide. They bring quiet, they bring ease, they bring rest. The ruins are not gone, they are transformed. Transformed into a story of mercy. A story that soothes tonight. Let the waves of Canopus carry you now, not into the sea, but into sleep. The Almighty made rest a mercy, and He grants it as softly as water moves. Archaeologists tell us the facts, but it is reflection that closes our eyes. Reflection on fragility, on gratitude, on endurance. These thoughts do not weigh heavy, they lighten. They lift burdens, leaving only calm. Calm like the ruins beneath the waves. Calm like the stars above. Calm that welcomes sleep. The ruins of Canopus remain where they are, beneath the sea, but their story travels. It travels through voices, through memory, through reflection. The Almighty allows stories to endure in this way, reaching beyond stone. Archaeologists preserve artifacts, but we preserve meaning. Meaning that crosses centuries to meet us tonight. Meaning that eases worry, slows thought, and softens hearts. Canopus does not call loudly, it whispers, and its whisper is enough, enough to guide us, enough to rest. So we leave Canopus, not in sorrow, but in calm. The Almighty decides what rises and what falls, what remains and what fades, and in His wisdom He left us this city as a teacher. Archaeologists uncovered its ruins, but He uncovered its lessons. Lessons of humility, patience, and gratitude. Lessons that ease us into peace. Tonight, those lessons surround us like the sea, surround us like the night, surround us like mercy itself. Mercy that brings rest. The waves close gently over Canopus, as they always have, yet its story rises above them, reaching us even now. The Almighty allowed silence to speak, and we are its listeners. Archaeologists show us what remains, but reflection shows us why it matters. Canopus speaks not of power, but of peace. Peace that calms the restless mind. Peace that guides the weary heart. Peace that whispers, rest now, rest deeply, rest in calm. So ends our journey with Canopus. The city sleeps beneath the sea, and now we too prepare for sleep. The Almighty gave us history as remembrance, night as mercy, and rest as a gift. Archaeologists preserve the fragments, but He preserves the meaning. Let that meaning settle within you tonight. Let it ease your breathing, soften your thoughts, and quiet your heart. The ruins rest, the sea rests, the night rests, the night rests. And so may you.